My neighbor's son came to my window at midnight and said, "I need you to see what's in my dad's shed." So I followed him. The tapping on my bedroom window jolted me out of sleep so suddenly, I knocked my phone off the nightstand, reaching for it. When I pulled back the curtain, Dylan Reeves was crouched on the roof overhang outside my second-floor window, his face pressed against the glass, eyes wild with something that looked like terror. He was 12 years old, lived 3 houses down, and had never spoken more than 5 words to me in the 2 years his family had been in the neighborhood. Now he was mouthing words I couldn't hear through the glass, his breath fogging the pain. I opened the window, and cold November air rushed in along with his whispered voice. "Ethan, please, I need you to come with me right now. I need someone to see what's in my dad's shed before I lose my nerve." His hands were shaking so badly he had to grip the window frame to steady himself. "There's something really wrong, and I don't know what to do, and you're the only person I could think of who might believe me." I should have asked more questions, should have woken up my parents or called the police, or done literally anything other than what I did. But something in Dylan's voice, that edge of desperation mixed with determination, made me grab my jacket and climb out onto the roof with him. We scaled down using the trellis my mom had been asking my dad to reinforce for months, and I was grateful for its shakiness because it meant I had something to focus on besides the pounding of my heart. Dylan moved through the darkness between houses with the practiced ease of someone who'd done this before, keeping to shadows and avoiding streetlights. November in Oregon meant everything was wet and cold, the kind of damp that seeps into your bones, and I could see my breath in small clouds as we moved. When we reached his backyard, Dylan stopped at the fence line and turned to me with an expression I'd never seen on a kid's face before. Pure dread mixed with resolve. "My dad keeps the shed locked all the time," Dylan whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of wind in the trees. "He's the only one with a key, and he told me and my mom that it's just where he keeps lawn equipment and tools, and we're not allowed in there because everything's organized and he doesn't want us messing it up." But tonight, I couldn't sleep, and I heard noises coming from the backyard. Not animal noises, human noises. Someone crying or moaning or something. And I looked out my window, and I saw my dad going into the shed at midnight, which made no sense, because why would you need to check on lawn equipment in the middle of the night? So I snuck downstairs and I found where he hides the spare key, taped under the workbench in the garage. And I went to look and I saw something that I can't unsee, and I need another person to confirm I'm not crazy before I figure out what to do about it. We crossed his backyard, and I could see the shed at the far end, maybe 20 feet from the house. It was larger than a normal storage shed, more like a small workshop, with windows that had been covered from the inside with what looked like blackout curtains. There was a padlock on the door, heavy duty, the kind you'd use to secure something valuable. Dylan pulled a key from his pocket and his hands shook so badly it took him 3 tries to get it in the lock. The click when it opened sounded impossibly loud in the quiet night. He pushed the door open, and the smell hit me first. Sweat and fear and something chemical, maybe cleaning products, all mixed together in a way that made my stomach turn. Dylan found a flashlight hanging by the door and clicked it on. The beam of light swept across the interior, and I saw what had brought him to my window. In the back corner, chained to a support beam, was a woman maybe 20 years old, gagged and bound, her eyes huge with terror when the light hit her face. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get help, to do anything other than stand there frozen. But Dylan was already moving forward, his face set in grim determination. "There's more," he said quietly, gesturing to a card table set up against the opposite wall. I forced my legs to move and followed him, keeping the flashlight trained on the woman who was making desperate sounds behind her gag. On the table were file folders, dozens of them, each one labeled with a woman's name and containing photographs. I opened the top folder with shaking hands and found surveillance photos of a young woman going about her daily life. Walking to her car, entering her apartment building, shopping at a grocery store. There were notes in handwriting I didn't recognize, detailing her schedule, her habits, her routine. The next folder contained similar content for a different woman. And the next, and the next. I counted 15 folders total, each one a detailed dossier on a different target. "My dad's a truck driver," Dylan whispered, his voice hollow. "He's gone for days at a time, sometimes a whole week, driving routes up and down the West Coast. I never thought anything of it because that's just what he does for work. But now I'm thinking about all those trips and all these folders, and I'm realizing he wasn't just driving trucks." He picked up a notebook that was sitting next to the folders and handed it to me. Inside were dates and locations and dollar amounts, entries going back at least 3 years. Next to each entry was a notation, either delivered or pending or failed. The handwriting matched the notes in the surveillance folders. I felt bile rising in my throat as I understood what I was looking at. This wasn't just one kidnapping. This was a business. Dylan's father was trafficking women, and this woman chained in his shed was either his next victim or one he hadn't managed to deliver yet. The woman made a desperate sound behind her gag, and Dylan turned to her, his young face twisted with anguish. "I'm going to get you out of here," he said, his voice cracking. "I'm so sorry this happened, and I'm going to fix it." He moved toward her, and I grabbed his arm, keeping my voice low and urgent. "We can't just unchain her and let her go. Your dad will know immediately that someone found her, and if he figures out it was you, you're in danger. We need to call the police right now and get them here before your dad realizes anything's wrong." Dylan shook his head violently. "My dad's asleep in the house right now. If we call the police and they come with sirens and lights, he'll wake up and he'll know I brought them here. He'll destroy evidence or run or do something to cover this up. We need proof that he can't deny, documentation that makes it impossible for him to talk his way out of this." I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures, my hands steadier than I expected considering the adrenaline flooding my system. I photographed the folders, the notebook with its entries, the woman chained in the corner, every detail of that shed that could serve as evidence. Dylan grabbed a folder and started photographing individual pages, working methodically, despite the tears streaming down his face. "How long have you known?" I asked quietly, still documenting everything I could see. "How long have you suspected something was wrong?" Dylan's voice came out choked. "Maybe 6 months? I started noticing weird things. He'd come home from trips and have injuries he couldn't explain well. Scratches on his arms or bruises on his hands. He started keeping the shed locked when it never used to be locked before. And a few times I heard him on the phone late at night talking in this voice I'd never heard before, cold and businesslike, discussing deliveries and payments and schedules. "Did you try to tell your mom?" I asked, and Dylan's expression crumpled. "My mom knows," he whispered. "That's the worst part. 3 weeks ago, I confronted her about the locked shed and the weird behavior, and asked if Dad was doing something illegal. And she got this look on her face, not surprised, just resigned. She told me that Dad's work was complicated, and I was too young to understand, and I needed to never ask questions about what he did for a living because some knowledge was dangerous. She said families protect each other by not knowing too much, and I realized she'd been protecting herself by willful ignorance and expecting me to do the same. But I can't, not now that I know there's a person chained up in our backyard." His voice broke completely on the last words, and I grabbed his shoulder, squeezing hard to ground him. "We're going to fix this. Right now. We have enough pictures. We need to call 911 and get this woman help." But before I could dial, light flooded the shed as the door swung fully open. Dylan's father stood silhouetted in the doorway, still in his pajama pants but holding a baseball bat, his face dark with fury. "What the hell do you think you're doing in here?" His voice was low and dangerous, and I saw Dylan go rigid with fear beside me. I shoved my phone in my pocket, praying he hadn't seen me taking pictures, and tried to keep my voice steady. Dylan heard noises and thought maybe an animal got in the shed. We were just checking to make sure everything was okay. Raymond Reeves stepped fully into the shed and closed the door behind him, and the click of it latching made my mouth go dry. He wasn't buying it. His eyes swept over the open folders on the table, the notebook we'd been photographing, and finally landed on his son with an expression that made my blood run cold. "You couldn't leave well enough alone, could you? Your mother told me you were asking questions. I told her you were too curious for your own good." "Dad, there's a woman chained up in our shed," Dylan said, his voice high and frightened but still defiant. "How can you act like that's normal? How can you act like I'm the problem for finding her?" Raymond's grip tightened on the baseball bat, and he took a step toward us. "You don't understand the world, Dylan. You think everything's black and white, good guys and bad guys, but it's not that simple. Sometimes people have to do things that look bad from the outside to provide for their families. That woman is part of a business transaction. She'll be delivered to her new employer, and we'll have enough money to pay off the house and send you to a good college. Everything I do is for this family." His justification was so casual, so matter-of-fact, that it took me a moment to process what he was actually saying. He wasn't denying trafficking women. He was defending it as economic necessity. "I'm calling the police," I said, pulling my phone from my pocket, but Raymond moved faster than I expected for a man his size. He swung the bat, and it connected with my forearm, sending the phone flying across the shed to smash against the wall. Pain exploded up my arm, and I stumbled backward, cradling it against my chest. Dylan screamed and lunged at his father, and Raymond grabbed him by the jacket with his free hand, shaking him hard. "You brought an outsider into this? You involved someone outside our family? Do you understand what you've done?" His voice had gone from cold to something worse, almost panicked. "I can contain this if it's just you. I can make you understand. But now there's a witness, and that changes everything." He looked at me with calculation in his eyes, and I realized with absolute certainty that he was deciding whether killing me was his best option. The woman in the corner was making desperate sounds behind her gag, thrashing against her chains, and the noise seemed to break through Raymond's focus. He dragged Dylan toward the door, still gripping his jacket, and pointed at me with the bat. "You stay here. Don't move. Don't try anything. I need to think about how to handle this situation." He shoved Dylan through the door, and I heard the padlock click from outside, sealing me in the shed with the woman and all the evidence of Raymond's crimes. My arm throbbed where the bat had connected, but I didn't think it was broken, just badly bruised. I waited 30 seconds, listening to Raymond's footsteps retreat toward the house, and then I moved. My phone was destroyed, but Dylan still had his, if Raymond hadn't taken it from him. I needed another way to call for help. The woman was making urgent sounds, and I went to her, carefully removing her gag. She gasped for air and then whispered frantically, He's going to kill you. He's going to kill both of you. You need to get out of here right now. What's your name? I asked, examining the chains that held her. They were secured with a combination lock that I had no hope of opening without the code. Jessica Holt. I was taken from a parking garage in Portland 6 days ago. He drugged me, and when I woke up, I was here. He said I was being sold to someone in Los Angeles and I'd be transported there tomorrow. Please, you have to get help. He's done this before. He told me I was his 18th acquisition, and he's never been caught because he's careful and he doesn't leave witnesses. Her voice was hoarse from days of screaming, and I could see marks on her wrists where she'd struggled against the chains. My family is looking for me. There are missing person reports and investigations, and if you can get word to the police that I'm here, they can connect it all to him. I pulled off my jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders because she was shivering in just the thin clothes she'd been wearing when she was taken. I'm getting you out of here, both of us. I just need to find a way past that lock. I searched the shed systematically, looking for anything that could help us escape. There were tools on the workbench, but nothing that could cut through the chains or break through the door. The windows were covered from the inside with plywood screwed into the frames. No way to remove them quietly. I could hear voices from the house now, Raymond and Dylan arguing, and I pressed my ear against the door trying to make out words. Raymond was shouting about betrayal and consequences. Dylan was crying and trying to explain that he couldn't let this continue. Then I heard a woman's voice, Dylan's mother, joining the argument. You're overreacting. He's just a child who doesn't understand. We can explain this to him. We can make him see reason. Her willingness to rationalize trafficking to her own son made my stomach turn. The arguing got louder, and then there was a crash, something breaking, and Dylan screamed. That galvanized me into action. I grabbed the heaviest wrench from the workbench and started attacking the hinges on the door instead of the padlock. If I could pop the pins, the lock wouldn't matter. The first hinge fought me, but eventually the pin shifted, and I worked it free with shaking fingers. The second hinge went faster now that I understood the angle I needed. I was working on the third hinge when I heard footsteps approaching the shed again, multiple sets, and I backed away from the door with the wrench raised as a weapon. The padlock clicked open, and the door swung inward, hinges I hadn't removed yet screaming in protest. But it wasn't Raymond who entered. It was Dylan, his lips split and bleeding, followed by his mother Karen, who looked pale and frightened. Ethan, I'm so sorry, Karen said, her voice shaking. Raymond's gone to get something from the garage. I don't have much time. Dylan told me you have pictures on your phone of everything in here. I pulled my shattered phone from my pocket and held it up. It's destroyed, but I uploaded them to cloud storage before he broke it. If I don't check in with my account by morning, my backup system automatically sends everything to a list of emergency contacts, including my parents and the police. I was lying. My phone had been smashed before I could upload anything, but Karen didn't know that, and the lie bought us leverage. She looked at Dylan's tablet in his hands, and her expression shifted to resignation. He has the pictures too, Dylan said quietly. I already sent them to 3 people with instructions to call the police if they don't hear from me by 6 a.m. That I'm safe. Also likely a lie, but a smart one. Karen pressed her hands to her face, and I saw her trying to calculate a way out of this that didn't end with her husband in prison and herself as an accessory. If I help you both get out of here safely, if I help you get Jessica to the police, will you tell them I cooperated? Will you tell them I didn't know the full extent of what Raymond was doing? The desperation in her voice was real, and I realized she was trying to save herself by throwing Raymond under the bus completely. Where is he right now? I asked, not agreeing to anything, but needing information. In the garage getting rope and a tarp. He's planning to deal with this permanently. He said if you and Dylan disappeared tonight along with Jessica, he could make it look like she escaped and took you both with her, and by the time anyone found bodies, there wouldn't be enough evidence to connect them to him. Her voice dropped to a whisper. He's killed before, not for business. There was a woman 5 years ago who tried to escape during transport, and he couldn't let her go because she'd seen his face. He told me it was an accident, but I saw how easily he made the decision. And I knew then what he was capable of, but I didn't leave because I was afraid he'd do the same to me if I tried. She looked at her son with tears streaming down her face. I've been a coward, and I've failed you by staying. But I can help you get out right now. There's a window of maybe 2 minutes before he comes back. Dylan looked at his mother with something between love and revulsion. You knew. All this time you knew, and you let it continue. Karen nodded miserably. I told myself I didn't know details, that if I didn't ask questions I wasn't culpable, but that was just cowardice. I knew enough, and I chose to protect myself instead of protecting the people he was hurting. She turned to me and her voice became urgent. My car keys are on the kitchen counter. Take my car and get Dylan and Jessica as far from here as you can. Drive to the police station downtown. Don't stop for anything. Raymond will come after you if he realizes you've left, but if you have enough of a head start, you can make it. I wanted to trust her, but trusting either of Dylan's parents at this point felt like suicide. Why are you helping us? What's stopping you from stalling us until he gets back? Karen's laugh was bitter and broken. Because I just watched my husband hit our son across the face for trying to do the right thing, and I realized I'd already lost my family. All I have left is the chance to do one decent thing before everything falls apart. Yeah. She pulled the key to Jessica's chains from her pocket and handed it to Dylan. Get her free. I'll watch for Raymond. Dylan moved to unlock the chains, and I kept the wrench gripped in my hand, not willing to be unarmed until we were far away from this place. Jessica's chains fell away, and she stumbled when she tried to stand, her legs weak from days of limited movement. I caught her and helped her stay upright, while Dylan grabbed the folders and notebook from the table, shoving them into his backpack with his tablet. Evidence, he said when he saw my expression. We need the original documents, not just photos. Smart thinking from a 12-year-old in crisis. We moved toward the door, and Karen held up a hand. Wait, let me check if it's clear. She stepped out of the shed, and I heard her footsteps moving toward the garage. Seconds ticked by, and my heart hammered so hard I could feel it in my throat. Then she was back, gesturing urgently. Now, he's still in the garage, but he could come out any second. Go. We ran across the backyard toward the house, Jessica between Dylan and me, supporting her weight. Karen met us at the back door with her car keys and her own jacket, which she draped over Jessica's shoulders. The police station on Maple Street, 15 minutes straight drive, don't stop for anything. She pressed the keys into my hand and looked at Dylan with devastating sadness. I love you. I'm so sorry I wasn't braver sooner. Dylan's face crumpled and he hugged her briefly before pulling away. You need to come with us. If we leave you here with him and he realizes what you did, he'll hurt you. Karen shook her head. I'll be fine. I'll tell him I tried to stop you, but you overpowered me. He'll believe that because he thinks I'm weak. Now go before he comes inside. We went through the house to the garage where Karen's sedan was parked, and I helped Jessica into the back seat, while Dylan jumped in front with his backpack clutched against his chest. The garage door opener was clipped to the visor, and I hit it, watching the door roll up with agonizing slowness. The engine started on the first try, and I backed out of the garage, tires squealing slightly on the smooth concrete. I was halfway down the driveway when Raymond appeared in the doorway from the house to the garage, his face contorted with rage, and he ran toward the car. I floored the accelerator, and the sedan shot backward into the street. Raymond reached the end of the driveway just as I threw the car into drive and punched the gas. He slammed his fist on the trunk as we pulled away, and I saw him in the rearview mirror running back toward the house, probably going for his truck. He's coming after us, Dylan said, his voice high with panic. He knows these streets better than you do, and his truck is faster than Mom's car. I took the next turn at dangerous speed, tires protesting, and headed toward the main road that would take us downtown. Jessica was crying in the back seat, great gasping sobs of relief and terror mixed together. You're safe now, I told her, trying to sound more confident than I felt. We're going straight to the police and they'll protect you. The streets were empty at this hour, and I pushed the car as fast as I dared, running red lights at intersections after checking for cross traffic. Behind us, headlights appeared, coming fast, and I recognized the profile of Raymond's truck. He's behind us, Dylan reported, twisting in his seat to look. Maybe 500 feet back. I took another turn, this time onto a residential street, hoping to lose him in the maze of neighborhoods, but he stayed right with us. The police station was still 10 minutes away at normal speed, maybe 7 if I kept pushing it, but Raymond was gaining. His truck had more power than Karen's sedan, and he was driving with the reckless confidence of someone with nothing left to lose. At the next intersection, he pulled alongside us and swerved hard, trying to force us off the road. I cut the wheel and narrowly avoided the collision but had to slow down, and he pulled ahead, then slammed on his brakes, blocking the street. I threw the car in reverse and backed up frantically, but he was already out of his truck and running toward us. I saw the gun in his hand at the same moment Dylan screamed, "Go, go, go!" I spun the wheel and reversed around the corner, shifting back to drive and taking off down a different street. A gunshot cracked through the night, and I heard glass shatter, the back window exploding inward. Jessica screamed and ducked down in the seat. Dylan was on his phone now, finally, calling 911 with shaking hands. We're being chased by Raymond Reeves and he's shooting at us. He's a trafficker. He has a kidnapping victim. We have evidence. We need help right now. He rattled off street names as I called them out, trying to give the dispatcher our location. Raymond's truck appeared behind us again and another shot rang out, this one hitting the rear bumper with a metallic thunk. They're sending units to intercept, Dylan reported. They said keep driving toward the station. They're coming to us. 2 more turns and I saw flashing lights ahead. 3 police cars forming a blockade across the street. I slammed on the brakes and the sedan skidded to a stop maybe 30 feet from them. Raymond's truck squealed to a halt behind us and I saw him through the rearview mirror, still gripping his gun, assessing his options. Officers were shouting commands, emerging from behind their vehicles with weapons drawn. Drop the weapon! Hands where we can see them! Raymond sat frozen in his truck for a long moment, and I thought he might actually try to shoot it out with the police. Then his shoulders slumped, and he slowly placed the gun on the dashboard, raising his hands. Officers swarmed the truck, dragging him out and forcing him to the ground. I turned off the engine with shaking hands and just sat there, breathing hard, trying to process that we'd actually made it. An officer approached the sedan carefully, flashlight raised. Anyone injured in this vehicle? His voice was authoritative but concerned. We're okay, I managed, though my voice came out hoarse. But we have Jessica Holt in the back. She's the woman from the missing person report out of Portland. Raymond Reeves kidnapped her and was holding her in his shed. We have evidence. I gestured to Dylan's backpack. Photos and documents. Everything you need. The officer's expression shifted to shock, and he immediately called for an ambulance, then opened the back door to check on Jessica. She was crying and shaking but coherent, and she kept saying, "Thank you, thank you, thank you," over and over. More police cars arrived, and suddenly the quiet residential street was chaos, with lights and radios and officers coordinating. A detective arrived and took preliminary statements from all three of us right there on the street while EMTs checked us over. My arm was badly bruised where Raymond had hit me with the bat, but not broken. Dylan's split lip needed cleaning but was superficial. Jessica was dehydrated and malnourished, but otherwise physically unharmed, though the trauma was evident in her eyes. They took us to the station in separate cars for formal interviews, and I spent 3 hours in a conference room explaining everything that had happened from the moment Dylan appeared at my window to the car chase through residential streets. They photographed Dylan's tablet and the contents of his backpack, and I watched a detective's face grow progressively more horrified as he flipped through the folders of surveillance photos. This is at least 15 potential victims, the detective said quietly. Some of these names match missing person reports we have from the past 3 years. This is going to break open multiple investigations across 3 states. He looked at Dylan with something approaching awe. You documented everything perfectly. The photos, the dates, the locations. This is better evidence than most adult witnesses provide. You may have saved a lot of lives tonight. Dylan just nodded numbly, the adrenaline crash hitting him hard. They contacted his mother, and she came to the station voluntarily, providing a detailed statement about everything she'd witnessed over the past 5 years. Her cooperation secured her a plea deal for accessory charges, rather than the full trafficking charges Raymond faced. The sun was rising by the time they finally let me call my parents and explain where I'd been all night. My mom answered on the first ring, frantic, and I heard the relief in her voice when I told her I was safe at the police station. She and my dad arrived 20 minutes later, and my mom hugged me so hard I couldn't breathe, crying into my shoulder. The detective explained what had happened, and I watched my father's face cycle through shock and horror and pride. You could have been killed, my mom said, pulling back to look at me with tears streaming down her face. You could have died helping that boy. My dad put his hand on my shoulder and squeezed. But he didn't. He did the right thing and he saved lives. That takes courage. They took me home, and I slept for 12 hours straight, crashed out in my bed with my phone buzzing constantly with messages from friends who'd heard about what happened through the neighborhood grapevine. Jessica Holt's family was contacted, and they drove down from Portland that same day to be reunited with her at the hospital. The local news picked up the story, and suddenly there were reporters camped outside both my house and Dylan's, asking for interviews and statements. My parents declined on my behalf, but Dylan gave a brief statement through his lawyer, explaining that he'd done what any decent person should do when confronted with evil. The investigation into Raymond's trafficking operation expanded rapidly as FBI agents joined local police in tracking his movements over the past decade. They discovered he'd been part of a larger network of traffickers operating along the West Coast, moving women between California, Oregon, and Washington. His detailed records proved invaluable in identifying other victims and other members of the network. Within a month, 7 additional arrests had been made, and 4 more kidnapped women had been recovered alive. Raymond's trial happened 9 months later, and Dylan and I both testified about what we'd found in that shed and what happened during the chase. Jessica Holt testified about her kidnapping and captivity, and 12 other women who'd survived Raymond's trafficking testified about their experiences. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Raymond was sentenced to life in prison, without possibility of parole on multiple counts of kidnapping, human trafficking, attempted murder, and weapons charges. Karen received 5 years with possibility of parole after 3 for her cooperation, though she'd have to live with the knowledge that her cowardice had enabled years of suffering. Dylan went to live with his aunt in Seattle, getting therapy and slowly rebuilding his life away from the house where his father had run a trafficking operation. We stayed in touch through messages and occasional visits, bonded by the worst night of our lives. Jessica Holt recovered physically, but the trauma lingered, and she became an advocate for trafficking victims, speaking at events and working with law enforcement to improve response protocols. She credited Dylan with saving her life, and they maintained a friendship built on shared survival. The other women Raymond had trafficked were harder to track, some having been sold years ago into situations they couldn't escape, but the FBI's trafficking task force continued working leads from his notebooks. Every victim recovered represented another life saved because a 12-year-old boy had refused to ignore what he'd discovered. My parents installed better locks on our windows and made me promise to wake them if anything strange ever happened again. But they also told me they were proud I'd helped when someone needed it, even though it had put me in danger. 2 years later, I'm starting college with plans to study criminal justice, inspired by that night and the detectives who'd worked tirelessly to bring Raymond's network down. Dylan's doing well in Seattle, top of his class, and talking about becoming a prosecutor someday to fight for victims who can't fight for themselves. We grab coffee whenever I visit Seattle, and we never talk about that night unless one of us specifically brings it up, both of us carrying the weight of what we witnessed in different ways. But when I do think about it, I remember Dylan at my window at midnight, terrified but determined, refusing to be complicit in his father's crimes. I remember Jessica's face when her chains fell away, and she realized she was actually going to survive. And I remember the choice I made to follow a neighbor's son into the darkness, not knowing what we'd find, but knowing that sometimes the scariest thing is doing nothing at all when someone asks for help. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.